Hopefully you already had your lunch. So just very quick reminders to turn in your evaluation later on. And this session is on labor market and remittances. This part of the stream on labor market that we had started yesterday with the launch of the ANU DPC study. And then we had another labor market and migration this morning, and we have this labor market developments and remittances. Chairing this session is Stephen House, the director of DPC. I think he was well introduced yesterday, so I think he needs no further introduction. And probably most of the people here already know Cinderella. So, here you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Prince, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see a good turnout for this panel session on the very important topic of labour market development and remittances. As Prince said, continuing on the discussion that's already started. So we have 4 papers and only 1.5 hours. So I'm going to be strict on the timekeeping, and you've all got a maximum of 15 minutes. So I don't know if we have any warning sign or...
It's already present here.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so you can't ignore, that is a binding constraint. We have to uphold the rule of law in this seminar. So please, I'll also start interfering if you don't follow the warning sign. So no more than 15 minutes for your presentations, and that will then leave good time for discussion. All right, so the 4 papers that we, 4 speakers, we have Andrew Parker, who's Principal Social Sector Economist from the Asian Development Bank. I'm not going to give long introductions in the interest of time. Andrew will be speaking on alternative perspectives on labour market development in the Pacific. Next we have Dr. Raymond Prasad. Okay, thank you. Dr. Raymond Prasad, ANU Crawford graduate and economic advisor to the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. And Raymond will be speaking on remittances, de-risking and impact on Pacific Island foreign countries. And then our third speaker, we have Professor Jayaraman, formerly from this university, now professor at the Fiji National University, who will be speaking on the impact of aid and remittances, looking at the Dutch disease hypothesis in Fiji, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga and Vanuatu. And finally, Dr. Sunil Kumar from here in Economics Department, Senior Lecturer, USP, who will be talking about constraints and challenges in Fiji's labour market. So it's a great mix of paper, and it's good to be looking at both domestic labour market and labour mobility issues together in the same session, because too often we completely separate them out, whereas obviously they're closely related. All right, so without further ado, I will hand over to Andrew, who will be speaking, as I said, on alternative perspectives on labour market development in the Pacific. So please welcome Andrew Parker.
Oh, nice. A round of applause. Thank you for that. All right. That one's not mine. There. Good. These are very short slides because we've only got a short time. So I'm going to give you my top 10, and this comes from a question that one of my managers posed to us in Manila, which is, what practical advice can policy economists offer to Pacific Island countries on how to create jobs? And actually, what can ADB do to help? Because we're just here to help. So a little bit. So I'm going to give you my David Letterman top 10 for what we might do. Just before I do that, TikTok. One caveat and one observation. It should really be, top 11, and somewhere very close to the number 1 would be labour mobility. But I think you've heard an awful lot about that already, and I don't think I have anything further to add to that one. But just bear that in mind, that should definitely be in the list. And the observation, really, why there are 10. I mean, I'm sure there are many more, but these are the sort of 10 that have occurred to me over the last year or two as I've been working on these issues at ADB. There are obviously no silver bullets. There's no single solution to this vexing question of how we create more decent work, decent jobs in the Pacific. So we need a kind of combination of multiple solutions, and always to bear in mind that whatever solutions we may work on need to be contextualized in the local environment. So having said that, here's my number 10. Not to ask a rude question, but how many people are under 30 in this room? Okay, well, you know, anyway, so I could probably go on to number 9, but I mean, I think the point is that, you know, you don't have to be young to think young, but the point is that I think, you know, a very good starting point when we think about labor markets in the Pacific is to think about it from a youthful perspective. And we know many of the challenges that young people face in terms of high rates of unemployment, you know, both in terms of their own skills and capacities, but also some discrimination in the workplace with regard to wanting to hire, you know, older people who have the experience. So a big gap, a big issue. We had a gathering at SPC a month or two ago where we brought some youth, and they really were youth under 30, together for a couple of days. And you know, you want to hear creative ideas. You want to hear things that can be done. It was a tremendous group, and they stayed and worked overtime. And came up with a tremendous set of ideas. So I think, you know, thinking about young people, working with young people is a good way to go. Regionalize. Well, this is about thinking more about the regional, you know, the key regional organizations. I might have a few on my list. It's not to suggest that there aren't others that are relevant, but I think if you think about SPC, if you think about PIPS, if you think about USP, that are all based here in Suva, and conveniently. They are all organizations that work on different aspects of skills development, but perhaps do so a little bit somewhat in isolation of each other. So working together to have discussions to bring them together, but also thinking more about how in our work, however we can partner with regional organizations on the agenda around skills and labor markets. I should say that this is perhaps a little bit more directed internally, that you know, one of the things that I think ADB we do reasonably well, but we could do more of in terms of our engagements with the regional organizations. We've just have a new partnership with PIPS. There are various engagements that we have with SPC. So I think this is something that we should think much more about. And then the sort of the corollary to you know, regionalizing is thinking about globalizing. And I think this is, you know, this will link back to some of the discussions that you've had about ICT development yesterday. There's a tremendous expansion in access that is now happening across the Pacific, high-speed submarine cables being installed, speeds increasing, and that really gives a platform for entrepreneurs, producers in Pacific countries to break down that barrier of distance. You have a potential to you know, connect to the world, and there are, you know, companies around the region that are doing that and creating opportunities for people to work and earn a living. A couple of years ago, a colleague of mine did some work on niche products in the Pacific. There are, you know, some very good candidates obviously here in Fiji, but I'm sure you all have some of your own. And at that time, if you went to some of the websites of these companies that are producing, they wouldn't perhaps necessarily have attracted you if you were a buyer from the other side of the world. If you now go to, you know, I happened to look at the other day, and you know, no commercial endorsement here, but you know, the Pure Fiji website is an outstanding example of being able to access you know, things to a sort of global standard, and so I think these opportunities that connecting to global markets offer in terms of creating more demand for jobs and employment. Yeah, well, so getting online, of course, once you're connected to the world, you have access to the world of knowledge. I know USP have been thinking a lot about how to expand their online offerings, blended learning, delivery of courses. That's on this end, and of course, once you're online, you can get access to all of those free online courses that are offered by edX and Udacity and all of these MOOCs that are out there. I know USP has actually experimented with one or two of those around the climate change agenda. And there are new things coming up in the market, things called nano degrees. You can get sort of little elements of a degree that build up successively, and over time you can get a qualification. So all of these options become available and open to people to build their skills and be more competitive in the labour market in terms of seeking work. So leveraging capacity. Capacity is scarce. We have pockets of potential, if I can put it that way, in different institutions across the Pacific. And I think looking at those and looking at ways in which we can take some of those pockets and scale them up. You've heard, I think, earlier about the EU PACVET project here at SPC, which is developing regional level qualifications, TVET in renewable energy, climate change, and DRR. So that potential to kind of scale, accompanied by the ICT connection, really gives you a tremendous boost in how you can reach people and the content with which you can do that. I think one question that it raises is, and again, perhaps reflecting a little bit on our own perspective as a development organization, that we do a lot of training embedded in our projects and TA work. Often the best thing that people get when they come on that training is a certificate of participation, a certificate of attendance, which is a nice thing to hang on the wall, but maybe not very valued in the labour market itself. So this push towards being able to get accredited qualifications that you can take to the labour market and use that to secure work is what we need to move more towards. While talking to each other more, I think we hear a lot about issues of skills mismatch. The private sector feels that they're getting graduates who don't have the right kinds of soft and hard skills. They're not up to date. They're not very good at turning up for work on time and staying and so on. Perhaps a sense from the public sector side that some of these responsibilities lie with firms themselves. So many countries have sort of industry councils where there's, thank you, that's good, so I'm at 5. Have sort of industry councils that provide fora for discussing what the skills needs are. But I suppose the question is, are those talk shops or is there hard talk about, the structure of curricula, what subjects are offered, how they're offered, what kind of levels they're offered at. This question, which leads me into the next one, about information. So more information. Markets function well when there's good access to information. Very few countries in the Pacific have good labour market information systems where people who are looking for jobs can find information on jobs, where they can find information about occupational profiles, what is the sort of the median wage that I could expect to work in different occupations, what occupations are in demand, where can I go and get training to become an expert in that field. So without this information, people are very much kind of left to their own devices. If they happen to be picked up by one program or another, that's kind of nice, but it's a bit incidental. So a more sort of systematic approach to getting information out on labour market performance. If you pick up many project documents, not just from ADB, but many that are investing in infrastructure, for example, there will always be a story about how that project is going to create more jobs. And I think the question is, how rigorously do we evaluate that statement? There is some work there. There are pieces of work that are being done. My colleague Christopher is working with a team from Amsterdam University, I want to say, it might be Amsterdam or Antwerp, on the assessment of rural roads in PNG, looking among other things at their impact on jobs. It's really a question of rather than having it as a kind of incidental outcome, to make it a formal outcome. Maybe difficult to specify exactly how many jobs you're expecting to create, but at least moving beyond sort of general statements about how we hope investments will lead to more jobs. So making it more explicit. Thank you. Number 2. Well, it's the one you didn't really want to see, because it's about, okay, if all of those things are kind of fun and interesting and things that we could kind of work on together, this is the kind of the realistic number 2. Let's not get too carried away. It takes a long time to achieve this. There's a nice quote somebody sent me in an article the other day. Jobs are created when entrepreneurs collectively discover new patterns of sustainable specialization and trade. This takes time, and it takes trial and error. Problems are systemic, but solutions are specific and frustratingly incremental. We're not going to kind of turn these things over, overnight. And my number 1, follow the money. There are millions of dollars, billions of dollars going into infrastructure development projects in the region. Many of these projects create large demand for labour. May not be for a very long period of time, but as sections of road move, you engage different people to work on the project. But we thought, and we've done some work with Richard Burton from ANU in PNG, looking at how we could encourage contractors to offer more apprenticeships, on-the-job training. We've now experienced from quite a few countries that use their public procurement policies to provide incentives for people bidding on public investment projects to actually have a skills development component in their project, where they talk about how they will, the kind of labor that they will employ, how they will offer opportunities for people to get more on the job exposure, and also in some cases to acquire new qualifications. So I think that is my top 10. I just wanted to.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, round of applause. Very interesting content, kept to time, and gets the prize for the least crowded PowerPoints. You set the example for us all. So now that's also given us a good framework to go forward, and we'll now hear from Raymond Prasad on remittances.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll have you at the end.
I'll just go quickly into, given that it's only 15 minutes, the concept map of what I'm going to present, and specifically connected to 4 distinct areas. And remittances, the impact and magnitude for the region, determinants of remittances, will look at the cost, the issues related to labor market conditions. We talked a lot yesterday about the labor mobility program, so we'll see how it fits into this. Financial systems development, I think that's one of the key risks for the determinants of remittances. De-risking, a lot of people don't really know about de-risking in the region, but we will look at what is de-risking globally and how does it impact the region on a broader scale. Looking at what are the policy options and responses and probably the challenges remaining. On the magnitude, I think everyone is very familiar in terms of the remittances flows in the region. This is based on the latest World Bank data that is available on the website. Based on magnitude, Fiji is the largest country that receives the largest amount of remittances of 222, followed by Samoa and then by Tonga. But in terms of as a percent of GDP, it's very low for Fiji compared to Tonga and Samoa, basically because Fiji has a more diversified portfolio of foreign exchange earnings. And you'll find the similar thing for Vanuatu. You look at 28 million that came out in 2014, but it's only 3.5% given the tourism revenues are quite significantly high, as well as revenues from the banking sector, from offshore banking. In terms of the impact of remittances and importance, if you look at there are 5 distinct areas that remittances have a very strong impact on: consumption, investment, which is also in private sector and SMEs, human capital development, smoothing over consumption over time. It's also a form of redistribution of income across borders that not many people think about. And if you look at in the Financing for Development Agenda, which is a UN process that started off last year, but then have been there for about 10 years now. It's called the 4A, is the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is also looking at domestic resource mobilization and international private flows in order to achieve the SDGs that has been set. So remittances plays a significant part of achieving SDGs over time. And also neutralizing to some extent, not all of it, the external shocks that are available or that are experienced by a country. So if you look at the economic impact in terms of consumption, it has a short to medium term impact on GDP. But if there is sudden surges in inflows of remittances, it can have a significant impact on imports if the domestic economy and production doesn't respond. So there's always a time to build constraint, as we know that the supply doesn't respond in short term. The other thing is looking at investment. Remittances are also used as a bridging finance for a lot of SMEs, and also at the same time for education and healthcare for a number of families. If you look at it, it reduces the opportunity cost of government actually putting in more social expenditure for the countries themselves. So this is also seen as a very positive impact on government expenditure. Smoothing intertemporal consumption, when people know that remittances where the family ties are strong and then they know the flows are permanent over time, they tend to look at consumption over time rather than consumption in short term. And this also enhances short-term savings plan, which can also be part of the financial inclusion program that is being targeted in the region now. On the global income inequality, this is something that was not addressed in the financing for development, but remittances can play a significant part of this. But the other thing, if you look at distribution of household income expenditure within the country, you'll find that the lower quartile and upper quartile difference can be really huge, measured by the Lawrence scale. But if you look at the gap that remittances fills in bringing the lower quartile up in their margin is significant as well, which has not been actually detailed in the region, or probably I think I haven't seen any of the studies that have looked at this particular aspect of remittances. And also increases the short-term wages in the host country when people migrate. So there is a propensity to hire more, but then the incentive is that you also increase wages given that there are less people to be employed. But then, as we know, that it's not the stock that people mentioned yesterday. We have to look at more in terms of flow of labor. On balance of payment, again, when there is a catastrophic event, anything that is related to natural disaster, you will see remittances shoot up, and also remittances tend to be counter-cyclical in the sense that they work against the world food and fuel prices. So when families are in hardship, you'll see remittances increasing. But then the question is, what determines remittances? There are a few things. First is the agency cost, the cost of cheap and reliable service. And you'll see this is the data from Send Money Pacific. I haven't put all the countries, virtually I can't fit all the countries there with all the data. But you look at Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu is a small island state, which is a dollarized case, and Vanuatu, which has a big offshore financial center. You'll see for Vanuatu, the banking cost and the MTO, which is the money transfer operators. These are the small remitting companies. You'll not find much difference in terms of Australia and probably in New Zealand, and there is none available for US. Similarly for Tuvalu, because Tuvalu is a dollarized economy, it's better to use the formal banking system. In case of Tonga, Samoa and Fiji, you'll see significant savings when you use an MTO compared to a bank as a means of sending money. The other aspect of that is the exchange rate spread. There was a paper written in 2013 by the Forum Secretariat on the request of the finance ministers in the region, and we presented this in Tonga meeting in 2013. A lot of time we focus only on the cost of remitting, but not on the exchange rate spread. And exchange rate spread more so in the markets from where they remit funds. If you look at in Fiji or in Samoa, in Tonga, the exchange rate doesn't move much because there is a band on exchange rate where it can move. So it's either plus or minus 2% or plus or minus 5% depending upon the central bank policy. But if you look at open markets such as Australia and New Zealand, there is no band on currency that they hold for the Pacific. So you'll see it fluctuates significantly based on the market size, the volume of transactions, and what is the opportunity cost for them to hold a certain currency. And you'll see, for example, here on the first one, this is the Forex on cash rates that are given, and this is on the telegraphic transfer. On the cash rates, you will see PNG probably has the highest, followed by Vanuatu. But if you look at the telegraphic transfer, Solomons, and these are all in basis points, so that is 100 of a percentage point. Similarly, if you look at the NZ banks, the largest margin here is on Tonga, and if you look at on TTs, the largest margin here is on Samoa. And basically why banks will do that is because of the margins, you multiply it by the volume of funds, they'll maximize the profit from these transactions. And exchange rate trading is one of the most profitable business for most of the banks in the world. The other is labor market conditions, but labor market conditions is both ways. Supply side, that is in Australia, New Zealand, or US or UK. And it also depends on the temporary movement of natural persons, which is the workers, and number of dependents that they have, because remittances is seen as something of a savings that you are able to send home. And also the currency volatility is also important in terms of looking at your choice of sending money now or money later. So that also has a bearing in terms of when people send money. On the demand side, it's more related to family needs and obligations or conditions, the local labor market conditions, and catastrophic events such as a natural disaster. One thing that we need to also unearth probably and look at in more detail is the length of migration and remittances. When people migrate, remittances does not flow immediately, or it takes time. So there is some strength in building remittances over time. So there is a time lag effect when people migrate and when remittances actually become sustainable. And this is why you will see the significant amount of remittances that's going to Samoa and Tonga has been because of the strong migration that was even before the independence period. But apart from that, the financial system development plays a big role in how you actually remit and what will be the cost. Looking at the financial players and services, whether you have MTOs, you have banks, or you have other agencies that are able to do that. The rate of the spread of the currencies, the fees charged by bank, the variations of the foreign exchange rate spread amongst banks, because different banks have different spreads, and the spreads and the volume of transaction, there are a host of things, the difference between MTO and bank foreign exchange spreads. And finally, it's look at the foreign exchange rate fees across the other parts of the world, which we haven't done at this point in time. So what is de-risking? I'll be really quick and I'll be happy to take any question. But de-risking is basically where the banks are cutting off the services of the money transfer operators, the small money transfer operators that operate and transact money. They are the most effective and low-cost reliable service available. What happens is that de-risking is basically a way where they cannot use their bank accounts to transact money across borders. Normally, the remittance network providers such as the money transfer operators do not have access to the payment system of the country. So what they have to do, the payment system is set up by the central bank in each of the country except for the dollarized economies in the Pacific. And to access that, it's only the banks that they can go through that. And basically, if the MTOs want to get onto the system, they have to go through banks. If banks close their account, they have no way of transacting. And that is one of the issues that they are looking in terms of how to bring the MTOs onto the payment system. Why de-risk? There are a lot of issues why banks de-risk. One of the is the reputational risk, and a lot of them is related to the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing that is enforced very strictly in US. A lot of these banks under the payment system have to clear under the SWIFT code, which happens in New York, so it comes under the jurisdiction of US. And US is able to enforce that across all payment systems in the world. And the reputational risk is that if you are found any of your bulk transactions goes through the SWIFT, and if any of those is illegitimate or sort of supporting any form of counterterrorism financing, the whole bank is blacklisted, and then it has significant repercussions in terms of fines. And similarly, the banks are trying to avoid this reputational risk. Now, what banks have done, instead of managing individual risk, they have done a wholesale approach of avoiding all risk. So they are just closing the accounts of all these MTOs. But the Financial Action Task Force, this is an international body that is looking into this issue. They recommend actually selectively looking at risk by banks, but banks don't want to take on this because it's not profitable for them. The other layer that they're introducing is from Know Your Customer. That was the initial agreement on looking at how to identify clients, because for money laundering and anti-terrorism financing, you need to have this information. They are moving on to Know Your Customer's customer, which becomes another layer of reporting, which is very difficult for banks to do. It can take up to between 3 to 6 months even to identify. And that has also administrative costs associated with it. It has a lot of impact for the FICs. The flow of funds becomes expensive and also difficult to remit. The exclusion from the global financial system, the loss of years of investment in MTOs. The MTOs didn't just crop up through private sector. They were initially being subsidized by huge multilateral development banks as well as governments in order to put up a new parallel financial system. And also the limited corresponding banks. Correspondent banks are, for example, ANZ in Fiji can correspond to, say, Barclays in London, so they have that relationship. But if Barclays sees that ANZ in Fiji is doing transactions which are against anti-money laundering, they will close off the correspondent banking, and that means they are cut off from the global system. Banks end up with the relationship, and also countries that are currently affected as Samoa and Tonga. Almost all of the MTOs that remit money to Samoa are closed except for one in Melbourne. For Tonga, it was recently announced in New Zealand that they will be closing MTOs, and this was, I think, just last month. RMI has an issue with correspondent banking, where Bank of Hawaii and Bank of Guam are actually pulling out the business just because they see RMI as a risky business. So globally, what's happening on the policy action, the Financial Action Task Force is looking at options and impact of anti-money laundering. But this is a very slow and long process. Diplomacy and advocacy, all the small island developing states, including Caribbean, the Indian Ocean countries and Pacific, are lobbying with the mature economies or developed countries to look at this more effectively and more faster. There was a World Bank Study Commission recently, but basically the arguments are that you have to strengthen the legal and regulatory environmental issues related to AML and CTF. Respondent banks and MTOs need to also look at follow strictly the AML and CFT issues, and supervisors need to enforce them very strictly. And the other issue that is coming up globally is embracing development in technology. What is happening in Silicon Valley is also affecting the financial markets. You look at the Bitcoins and virtual currency or cryptocurrencies they are called, is having an impact. The new one and the most safest one is looking at blockchains. So if you look at the railroad system, probably the cryptocurrencies will be the wagon and blockchains will be the railroads. So they are the infrastructure that you set up. And Commonwealth Bank of Australia with other 10 banks are trying this with private banks. In the Pacific, the Foreign Finance Ministers meeting have already advocated for high-level dialogue. They are also looking at improving the payment system, but that differs from dollarized to own currency arrangements for 6 FICs. What Samoan government is proposing, if they're all MTOs are closed, they will open up a government account and people will be able to deposit into the government account, and then they will do local disbursements in Samoa, while the offshore account will be kept for investment. Diaspora bonds, I think Tonga was exploring this with Commonwealth Secretariat sometime. It can be a big plus if you are able to trade between borders. And then they're also looking at virtual currencies. Finally, the global agenda is slow. Governments cannot actually force the country's banks to de-risk, and technological advancement are there, but FICs are probably not at this point ready to adopt because of the financial system development. And investment requires partnership, which includes donors, local capacity building, and inclusion. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Raymond. That was really interesting, and it's an area that we touched on in our own report, but hardly with any detail. So that's we filled a big gap there. It's one thing we want more remittances, but there are 2 ways to get more remittances. One is to have more people working overseas. One is to have a lower cost of sending the remittances. And we haven't made enough progress on the second. In fact, you're suggesting we're going in the wrong direction. So that's a very important contribution. Thank you. Now go on to Professor Jayaraman, who will be looking at the impact of aid and remittances and the Dutch, whether they lead to the Dutch disease. Are there any more? There's a chair over here. Do you want to sit? I feel bad for you standing.
Thank you. Now, this paper is written with my younger colleague from Malaysia, Mr. Ivan Lau. And I'm looking at the aspect of export competitiveness. I think the session which ended before lunch, I think Christopher Edmonds made a point. It was a final comment on the general export competitiveness in the Pacific Island countries. The imports are rising for many reasons, including the rise in GDP and per capita income in the last few years, and how to bridge the deficits. And we were looking at the other sessions about promoting exports in niche products, and of course tourism, which is now becoming more important. For example, in Fiji is the #1 growth, one of the engines for the last few years, and now it has become #1, replacing sugar to the 3rd place. Remittances now comes 2nd part. Now, the one aspect is how to make the exports competitive. And it is a fear always, unrequited transfers. This term is no longer used. I remember it was used some 10 to 15 years ago in all the World Bank documents. Transfers, private transfers, unrequited transfers. Now it is no longer used, but it is very significant term. Unrequited is non-reciprocated transfers. Of course, when I put aid, there is always no strings attached, especially if it were just generous aid, regardless where the money goes. However, no aid comes free. It's always strings attached. And nobody remembers Helen Hughes' thought-provoking title, 8 failed Pacific Islands. And later on the title was changed, ? Because she had to temper it down. But the fact is, aid money is always fungible. So it comes, it can be used for anything else. And of course, remittances go to the private families and households. Do they really affect exchange rates? That's the question. Because when you say competitiveness, exchange rates do get affected if free money comes in. And we always define exchange rate is a very, very confusing. However, we use the more acceptable term because when the domestic currency goes up, also exchange rate means. That means we define the units of foreign currency per unit of domestic currency. Because I teach this course, and I teach 2 courses, Monetary Economics by Michigan. He uses this definition. However, if you look at Dornbusch Macroeconomics, any edition, you use the opposite one. So I want to make it no more confusion. And of course, some young students are here. They may always feel, what do you mean by currency goes down and the exchange rate goes up? That is because you use the other definition which World Bank uses or IMF uses in the financial statistics. So the rise in value of domestic currency and exchange rate mean the same. Now, question is, we always use the term Dutch disease. Many of you are aware, younger people here, that is, I will refer to the next slide, and we are not including PNG. Papua New Guinea is one of the 6 countries having adopted as their own legal tender, their own currencies. So other countries adopt either Australian, New Zealand, or the North Pacific, the US currency. So PNG is an outlier in all purposes, the largest population, 7 million, and enormous resources, natural as well, mineral resources, and tree crops. Tremendous resources, and last year the growth was 15%, the highest among the all big countries. Now, the theory behind Dutch disease is the unintended negative impact of a resource boom on a country's non-resource tradable sector. The term actually owes to the Dutch currency crisis way back in the 60s, the discovery of the North Sea gas fields in the Dutch economy. So the earnings spent within the economy lead to rise in price of non-tradables. As the income goes up, you consume more water, no doubt, more automobiles, they use plenty of water for washing, and electricity is generated and consumed. Of course, land value goes up, services also go up. So the rise in domestic price level and increase in real exchange rate hurting competitiveness of exports. The Dutch disease is extended to cover the impact of unrepeated capital transfers in over time is no more. Of course, Dutch disease being now tested in PNG with my other colleagues soon. But unrepeated capital transfers like aid and the remittances will also affect export competitiveness. Pacific Islands are price takers. Traditionally, we all know it. The traded goods, their prices determined outside the island countries. Increase in domestic expenditure results only in the rise in prices of non-traded goods, which I mentioned to you, water, electricity, house rents, and other services. So the relative price change leads to change in the composition of output. The output in the traded sector contracts. And the 2 major channels is the inflows of aid and remittances are expected to result in spending effect, causing an increase in the consumption of tradables and non-tradables. The prices of tradable determines outside. So the relative prices increase, boosting the domestic price level. So higher real exchange rate, both fueling and fueled by a resource movement effect. The rising non-tradable prices of shift resources from production of tradables to non-tradables. These shifts exert upward pressures on wages and production costs. The overall domestic price level goes up. So resulting appreciation hurts competitiveness. So there is also the effect of consumption-leisure trade-off. Leisure is preferred as remittance rises, reduction in overall supply of labor, growing demand, higher consumption due to remittance, reduction in labor supply. So price increases in non-tradable sector. Rise in domestic price level result in the real exchange rate appreciation. We all know, I think Raymond has already covered this aspect of remittances. I'm now referring to the aid. So the aid is traditionally low as a percentage of the GDP for Fiji, but we all know Solomon Islands had the highest aid during the their own domestic crisis, which we all know in the early 2000s. And however, it is still continuing above 10%, 15% in all the island countries. In the Pacific Island remittances, Raymond covered it. So we all know as a small percentage for Fiji, but the amounts are very big. It is about more than 220 million for Fiji, highest. But the percentage is low here because of the large GDP base. And real index, effective exchange rate index from the IMF, and we had to construct for Tonga and Vanuatu because they are not reported in IMF financial statistics.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Exports of PICs as a percentage have been highest in the Solomon Islands because the log exports. The rest of them is all coming down. The exports of PICs as percentage of imports. That is the point that Christopher before lunch he was mentioning about the gap. And the exports of Pacific Islands are coming down over a period of time. So we are testing with a simple model and data constraint. When you have a panel discussion, we have to have a balanced number of observations for all countries. So we have the two variables, namely aid and the remittances. But if you look at the policy variable, domestic credit, which is a proxy variable for capturing the effects of fiscal and monetary policies, no a priori conclusion on the direction of the domestic credit. So domestic credit has been increasing higher percentage. Fiji, Samoa, and almost all countries, that is, countries are doing expansionary policies. So the empirical investigation shows, as I mentioned, will have a negative sign if the expansionary policies are increasing the domestic output of non-tradables. So if we have a simple equation here, and the result is, of course, time limit, so I'm just putting it here. The real exchange rate index is a function of aid and remittances and a negative sign for domestic credit. That means expansionary policies have actually had the opposite effect on the real exchange rate. So if we have a 1% rise in the aid results in 0.2% increase in real exchange rate, and similar in remittances leads to 0.3. The expansionary policies result in a rise in non-tradable supply, therefore fall in REA. So many commonalities, summary I'm doing it, 1980 to 2014, and this study says the index numbers and so on. The conclusion will be strong evidence in favor of significant direct association with aid and remittance inflows and appreciation in domestic currency, and phenomenon of the Dutch disease is established. And ratio of the domestic price level to world price level is a determinant of the IDR. World price is beyond the control. Components of domestic price level index include price of non-tradables. Supply of output of non-tradables has to be stepped up. Increase in the output of non-tradables, import substitution wherever possible. And especially we have in island countries, vegetables, fruits and milk, and large areas of arable land unutilized, and the emphasis should be on lessening domestic inflation. And if you do that, even the tourism and other will be encouraged because of the fall in the real exchange rate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jayaraman. Sorry if you made you rush at the end. You covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in questions. But it's very interesting to see that they both seem to cause the Dutch disease. Now, our final speaker, Dr. Sunil Kumar, will be talking on labour market constraints and challenges here in Fiji. So it's an appropriate way to finish the session.
Thank you, Chair. My presentation this afternoon is basically focused on the labour markets in Fiji. In my presentation, I'll be showing you a lot of data. I'll be skimming through some of them, but there would be certain points that I would be making from them. This is the layout of my presentation, a brief introduction, and then overview of the labour market. I would get the wage rates, labour laws briefly, and then migration and sector constraints, and then some policy statements, perhaps. All right, Fiji has gone through a difficult, political history in the last 30 years. And most of our economic history after independence, we have seen low growth rates. Employment has been a problem, which basically means we have always had unemployment problems. Productivity is one issue that is central to this. When we're talking about wage rates and then compare it to the productivity, that is when we realize what the problem is. And there are many broad issues. I cannot state them here, but those broad issues could be the underlying problems. It could be political, it could be structural or whatever. Thinking over this subject, I was actually wondering how to go about this. I thought that I should point out some of the sectors where the government and everybody is looking to for economic growth. Tourism sector is the number one sector at the moment. Construction sector is always the indicative one, which tells us what is happening in the economy. Financial sector has grown significantly over the last few years. You will see it in the data. Manufacturing sector is one which is troubling, and I'll point that out. Trade sector, which is partly tourism, and the other trade things. In an economy like ours, where really when manufacturing or processing is not growing, you would expect service sectors to grow. But there seems to be some issues there, which means that trade services are not really growing. All right, and there are other sectors. Health has got issues, education and business services. Any business, any entrepreneur in this country will tell you the bad stories. So this paper at the moment is not an academic one. It is more about my own personal experience as an entrepreneur. So come next first week of day, probably it will be an academic paper. All right. Now this graph tells us a huge story about the political history of Fiji. All those trends, waves that we see, they all tell some kinds of stories to us about what has happened. Now, I was talking about the manufacturing sector, and in this graph, you can basically see what is happening. Those economists who know how transitional, transformations happen of different sectors would probably want to figure out why manufacturing actually is sloping downwards slightly. It should actually be moving upwards. And even if that is moving downwards in an economy like this, then services sector should actually be showing some kind of offsets, moving sharply upwards to compensate for declining manufacturing sector. So that's the story. You'll see when we look at the employment data for the manufacturing sector, employment is falling in that one, and that is the thing that I would want to point out. And if you were to make some comparisons, I think that will indicate there are some fundamental problems. If you were to look at a growing economy like Mauritius or say Malaysia, you'll see that manufacturing sector and services sector both would be increasing slightly, while the agriculture would be dipping downwards. We don't see that here. That's the problem. All right. So I'm showing you some employment figures here. If you look at manufacturing, that's the one I'm talking about. Over the last 4 or 5 years, you see the negative over there. Okay, if I can point that one out, all right, you can see the negative out there. That's what I'm talking about. For a developing country like Fiji, we should see some kind of positive growth in manufacturing. So that is not visible. All right, my personal experience and whatever I want to say is really about what is happening on the ground. Most businesses will tell you that they are not finding appropriate skills. All right, despite the fact that we have USP, which is churning out lots of graduates in economics and accounting and management and so on, even in sciences now, but they're not appropriately experienced. They don't have the skills that the businesses need. FNU, which used to be FIT, now does the same, what USP does. Fiji probably does the same, training white collar, professionals. Sangam Nursing School nurses, that problem probably is now addressed, but that is confined to health and health services and medicine. There are some private training schools, mostly computer-oriented kind of schools that train, professionals who can do some work. So this is the state of things. There's a huge gap existing in technical training. That is where the real pinch is. Right? You go and ask those people who are running small industries, small businesses, medium-sized businesses are, feeling the pinch. They don't have people to employ, really. What are the technical areas? Mechanical technicians, auto mechanics, construction, carpentry, painters. You don't find painters in Fiji. All right, this is how bad it is. Bricklayers, plastermen, whatever, plumbing, electricians, hard to find. Even if you are willing to pay them, they are not there. Right? Joinery fitting, machine operators. I spoke to one big business. They said major problem was, getting machine operators. They don't have grader operators. They don't have forklift operators. These are the fundamental problems of the industries in Fiji. All right. So, for small businesses, you could employ office assistants, but they lack in skills. They are not multitask for the reason that Fiji is a small economy, and there are very small businesses, that employs 5, 6 people. You need people in the office who can do many different things. And today, the kind of requirements, the legal requirements for businesses, they are huge. Comes from the tax department, comes from the FNPF, comes from the labor law requirements and things like that. And let me tell you, every small business employs at least one person just to do that. So you can imagine the kind of cost it means to small businesses. And small businesses really can't sustain that. Okay, so lack of skills and experience, lack of skills in high IT, communication technology, so on. Managerial skills is lacking. There's no incubation scheme in Fiji. That's a huge problem. So you don't see trained entrepreneurs. people with degrees having some managerial skills. It's totally lacking. Labor shortage in rural areas. Okay, there are no ordinary laborers out there. Farmers getting old. So these are broad problems that are out there. We did a survey, small survey, to find out from businesses what was the major problem with the employment, hunt for employees. That candidates lack job experience. What happens? People coming out from the USP or SNU, they have 2 or 3 years, 4 years experience, and they take their flight to Australia and New Zealand. This is the problem. And if you were to do anything innovative, there's no chance at all, really. And you can't expect them to do, new recruits to do much, right? Because the experienced ones have left. Labor shortage could be a long-term, permanent shock unless immediate steps are taken. So this is for the government to take action now. Labor market constraints is the key problem in attaining higher productivity. It's almost impossible. As soon as you train someone, you ask those people who are in the industries. People get some experience. They want to go for higher wages and all that. They start applying and all that. And there's no way you can hold them back. And there are, of course, apart from going abroad, within Fiji, they would want to move. Fiji is no longer. Fiji is no longer a low-wage, middle-income economy. Okay? So wages, you can see the trend is upwards. Now, it may not be high wage in terms of Australia, New Zealand, US like that. But if we were to do a comparison with the developing countries, that's negating productivity. Okay? Wage rate is increasing, but it's not matching productivity. That's the problem. So we have some more data here on wage. I don't think I would be able to go over them. But some interesting points I thought I could make. Perhaps in this one, if you look at this one, that was a very interesting one. The armed forces average salaries was only second to this category. That speaks volumes about what is happening. Yeah. And of course there are other stories. I don't have time to tell you. There are two key problems to address. Low net population growth. You can see the trend. That's for the Itoke Fijians. This is for Indo-Fijians, which is negatively slope. So population growth is negative for Indo-Fijians, and overall it's very small. So that's where the problem is. Lack of appropriate training, and this is where Fiji needs TAFE model institutions. And I think the Fiji government should take steps right now. Unemployment, there's data, some steps are being taken. National Employment Center, that also tells you volumes about what's happening. Lots of trained people are not finding jobs. 12,000 graduates are out there unemployed. All right, so that basically means that it's not matching. Their skills are not matching. They don't have, or basically you could figure out from the other end that there's not enough jobs being created to fit these graduates. Okay, so there's this graph. You can have a look at it. This is the statement that came from the government in the last budget. 3 or 4 points. No description, no details of what has been done. I think that's business as usual kind of statement that is being made. I don't see government being really worried or taking appropriate steps to address these problems that exist there. Migration and labor mobility. Migration started from 1987, right? It started from 1987, and we see the real problems now. Migration must be discouraged in the long run. Now, this may be a contrary statement to what others have been saying, but I see this as a very important point, and I thought I would throw this wildly so that some people start thinking. Long-term policy prescriptions are needed. Australian national labour mobility policies may not augur well for Fiji. Maybe it does for other Pacific islands like Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and so on. So some styles for hard thinking. Appropriate education and training policies are needed. How exactly? I don't know. We'll leave it to the Minister for Education. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you. That's a good paper to end with because it should provoke a lot of discussion. So all four of our speakers have been not only given good papers, but they've been very disciplined. And they've all stuck to their time, and that means that we have a good 25 minutes for discussion. So now everyone else has to play their part by having questions to ask. And
my questions to Raymond is whether there has been any work to explore the sustainability of remittances from the diaspora end at micro level.
all right, let's take a few questions. Yeah.
So my question is with for Sunil. I was wondering if people are getting training, experience, and they're just so if it is so easy to migrate that you want to stop migration, I think it is a good opportunity for Fiji to train people, because if the demand is very high, there is no point in restricting supply. So I was wondering why you see that people are not getting training, not skilled. Is it because of the lack of resources? Is it because of some government policies that is hindering on this one? And the second point that I want to make is certainly there is a skill mismatch, but what is the role of the retirement age here? Because I believe that I think retirement is in most of the ministries, especially 55 years or something. So what is your take on that? Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, my question is for Sunil as well. In the list of educational institutions you identified, you didn't make reference to APTC, and so I'd be interested to know to what extent you think that's going somewhere to rectifying those gaps, because I know it has had some impact positively on similar gaps in Vanuatu. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's start.
Exploring the sustainability of micro level. In Fiji, there has been, and in the countries with central banks, so 6 of these countries, they have a central bank group which is looking at financial inclusion program. So within the recipient economies, you'll see that there is significant work done on financial inclusion, which is looking at sustainability of remittances and how you use it in terms of its effectiveness. But in the remitter economies, and I would like to quote a study that was recently done about a few years back, which was on New South Wales by University of New South Wales, and looking at the composition of remittances and the factors that determine remittances from New South Wales households, and these are mostly Tongan and Samoan households, to their own countries. And basically, it's very disaggregated because it depends on people's linkages to their own country and to their family. So there is no such training in terms of how they can look at sustainability. It more depends on the level of income and the level of ability to hold on to a job. That's basically.
Thanks, Manoj, for your questions. And you said why people are not getting trained appropriately when demand is there. Well, people are getting trained, but they are not getting trained appropriately in appropriate sectors that are growing, or subsectors where there is a need. I think Fiji government, or the politicians, you may say, have done pretty well over the last 30 years in terms of building institutions. But I think the policies were not right to actually develop the capacities in that particular way that it would match the industry the way they were growing and where there was need. The recent government made it worse because it was more driven by their electoral strategies. And this is a bold statement to make, but I think it has to be said. The scholarship scheme that they have, everybody qualifying to enter into any institution have got some kind of government funds to seek through loans or whatever and get into those programs. No parent in this country wants to train, really, maybe there are very few, would want to train their kids as carpenters or as plumbers or things like that. Everyone want their kids to be white collar, kind of professionals. So they all want to go into USP and FNU and do these degrees. That's one major problem, because I have spoken to some people and they have said, I said, why don't you get people in these areas? They said there are no takers. They have programs, they have monies allocated, but there are no takers. So that's the problem. So how do we reorientate this psychology, the people's psyche towards it? I don't know. On retirement age, again, it was a huge blunder, and I think the Fiji government made, or rather the military government at that time made a huge blunder by reducing the retirement age. The idea was to show that they were creating employment. The most stupid thing any government can do, or responsible government can do. So that's my explanation. Okay. APTC, if that's the one, yes, I think they are contributing, but I don't know the exact details. They are in the computer areas and perhaps some other skills, but I'm not too sure.
Do a lot of trades.
Trade. Okay. Technicians and all that. So maybe they are not doing enough. So we would need lot more people like that who can fit in to our growing industries. Thank you.
I think there's one point which I would like to add. From the FNU side, he said, Dr. Sunil Kumar referred to saying they are also producing white collar workers, training in accounting and commerce and so on. I want to point out there's a new service industry is developing in Fiji. This is the movie industry. FNU has taken a big step, maybe a small step for FNU, but going to be a big step for Fiji. So a lot of Bollywood movies are going to be shot here. In fact, 2 or 3 movies have been produced. Also local talents, that is Fiji own producers and directors are coming, and the TV big serial is coming. And I think, I know, and FNU, when Dr. Ganeshan, the dynamic Vice Chancellor, introduced it, many of us were laughing. And of course, the local people are now becoming Bollywood actors, and more movies are coming. It's a new service industry. It's also a white collar, unfortunately. They are not going to soil their hands, but they are going to join a new service industry. Thank you.
But we need more investments, I guess.
I think investment will be coming in with good entrepreneurs. Here they know where money is. Follow the money. I think that is the number last year. Thank you.
Just to add a couple of points, there's some work that's been done to develop occupational profiles to give people, young people, more information about what they can expect in terms of future earnings and what sort of qualifications they need for certain types of occupations, and that information needs to get down to the schools. So just one additional thought that that whole kind of career development function is one that is probably an area that could do with some further impetus and development, because I think if one's not providing information and guiding people to make with information to make informed choices about what careers they can pursue, where the demand is in the market, Of course, people have a free choice. They don't have to go where they're encouraged to go. But I think a more kind of explicit way of matching up where the needs are in the labour market with the courses and also the scholarship funds that are available to support those.
Okay, so thank you. Let's have a second round of questions. I know we've got one here and one here, and then I want to especially encourage younger people, the students here, to ask questions. Bearing in mind Andrew's first point, I think young. But yeah, please.
My name is Magnus Matano. I'm with the Office of the Chief Trade Advisor, and I think my voice is loud enough. I mean, not to use the microphone, but my question is...
You're recording it.
Oh, okay.
You're not being recorded.
Okay. My question is aimed at Raymond. You were mentioning the cost of remitting money remitting money. And I was wondering, I remember hearing how remitting money from the Pacific is within the Pacific has one of the highest rates in the world. And if I'm not mistaken, remitting money from Australia to PNG is the costliest of in the world. And I was wondering, do you happen to know why the Pacific is so expensive in terms of remitting money, especially considering there's so many money transfer organizations? You think that because of the competition there'd be competitive prices, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Thank you.
Okay. Good question.
I'm not so young, but I'll ask a question which I think young graduates at USB probably ought to ask. About 15 years ago, I heard discussions about matching labor market needs in Fiji with the kind of graduates that the University of the South Pacific was churning out. And this is not only graduates that the University of the South Pacific was churning out, but churning out at universities in Australia and New Zealand for the Pacific labor market. And 15 years down the road, we're having that same discussion, and across the Pacific, certainly here in Fiji, we have just seen, the numbers of huge unemployed young people. Not only young people, but old people like me. I have almost 2 master's degrees, one from ANU, one from USB. I've got several postgrad degrees. But I, for a very long time, was not able to find employment. And I get emotional about this because I see a lot of young persons who will be going through exactly what I went through. And it's painful. You put a lot of your own investment into an education, and you come out with a degree or a master's degree, and you're expected to do internships, you're expected to do volunteer work as a teacher for 3-4 years before you can get sustainable employment in Fiji. And there really has to be something seriously wrong when we sit on University of the South Pacific grounds and talk about the same issue year after year with, persons from ADB sitting here who put in, persons from various development agencies sitting here who put in a lot of money into the University of the South Pacific to talk about these issues, to build these universities. Yet there's a serious disconnect. So why is there this disconnect? And why are economists, senior economists like Sunil, sitting here talking about the impossibility of this situation and not, doing research to be able to look at the needs of the industry and be able to tell the University of the South Pacific that you're doing something wrong in churning out the number of graduates you're churning out who can't get employed.
Thank you very much. That's a very passionate statement, and we'll come back to it. Any other questions? Yeah, very good.
Hi, my name is Sun Chan. I'm from Yale University in the States. Recently I talked with a graduate or a student at USP who is from Kiribati, and she mentioned that for a lot of them they come here to study and get a lot of advanced degrees, but for the options are limited in terms of when they go back to their own country, most of the formal employment is in the public sector. So working for governments that are large and sometimes inefficient. And then there are very limited options when they're staying here. What are your comments and thoughts about kind of on a regional level how the labor market works out in that respect, and how you know, how graduates are pursuing options that are more geared towards employment in the public sector and not necessarily in the private sector?
Another good group of 3 questions, and we'll again start with Raymond, if it's all right.
I think just check quickly on the Send Money Pacific. I think the bank cost that is the bank cost from Australia to PNG is around 17.9%, which comes around $80 some for $500 of remitting from Australia, and around $55, which is 11.4 for $500, which is relatively higher than all the countries that I showed on the table. And there are a few reasons for this. One could be the volume of transactions, because if banks don't hold that currency, they have to purchase it. If you purchase it from say Bank PNG, then there is a cost involved. So all that cost is added back to the client. The other thing is that whether PNG Kikina has more susceptibility in terms of volatility, so a lot of MTOs might not hold it for very long. That probably would be the other one. And basically the financial system which it remits is based on the other end of the transaction. So when MTOs have corresponding MTOs on the other side, it becomes easier. But if you go to generic MTOs, which are probably say run by say an Indian or a Filipino in Australia, and they have to remit, they will remit to probably your contact point in PNG, but charge a premium on it. So these are fundamentally the difference. But if you look at the Samoan and the Fijian and the Tongan MTOs, most of them are home solutions, because they have started off with Fiji, and then they have moved into these markets because of the diaspora, and then they have started this. Whereas PNG diaspora in Australia is very very limited and very small. But it basically comes to the same system what you have in Asia. They have this Hawala system, which if you look at Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, where you just give the money to the person in say UK, but that person will not remit the money. He has some counterpart who will be dispersing it to the person, but that's part of like money laundering as well, because they have these illegal funds which are converted into legal funds over time. And it is, I think IMF has written a whole book about it, and then you can have a read about that as well. Thank you.
These all things happen. Also, not many banks are there, who can actually remit things.
Yeah. Yes, PNG banks are very profitable. So the question around Fiji labour market and the mismatch.
Well, I thought it was a statement.
It is a statement. Eddie, would you like to make any comments on the statement?
We can do research. My colleagues do research in this area, but I think there's no effective communication in terms of how we're going to steer the USP leadership towards that. I mean, that's another question. Yeah. So there are people doing research, making small statements here, there, but I think the onus is on the USP leadership, or perhaps the governments in the Pacific to steer that out.
And what about Kiribati and the smaller Pacific islands? What are their opportunities for domestic employment, apart from government? Andrew?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we all agree not very many, right? I think historically the seafaring business was a fairly good one, but of late that's kind of gone into decline, I understand. So I think this is why we do have to. I take the point that we're asking many of the same questions that we've been asking for a long time. But I think things don't always stay the same. So I think, UST has opened up a new campus recently in Kiribati. We've got high-speed internet going in there that give people access to knowledge and information. They can get skills and training online. One has to also look at the business environment in different countries, and whether government policy is actually conducive to forming new businesses. One has to look at issues of access to finance. Can people who want to start businesses get not only set them up quickly, but get access to capital to start their business? So I think this is why, you know, a number of these things need to come together. I talked about the youth because I think the pace of change is, you know, for those of us who are a bit older, kind of hard to keep up with sometimes. You know, maybe the solutions are, you know, some of these solutions people will pursue under their own, you know, on their own initiative. I think the question is, are we, you know, clearing the way to let them get on with that and find new ways of creating on businesses online, of connecting to markets through the internet. So you know, these are sort of some of the new frontier, I guess, some of the new frontiers, I guess. I do think just one other thing. This question about how we encourage training institutions to be more responsive to the needs of the labour market. I think you know, we need to listen to employers better, and we need to somehow make sure that institutions are being more responsive to the articulated needs of employers. You know, there's a little bit of a catch-22 because I think some companies will say, well, actually, we'd rather take younger, untrained people and do it ourselves than take people who are coming out of educational systems because they've been taught bad habits. You know, they're not acquiring the right kinds of skills and don't have the right attitude towards work. So give us a high school leaver any day over, you know, somebody who's coming with a degree and unrealistic expectations of what they can expect when they start work.
All right, look, we are almost out of time. So are there any more pressing questions? We've got one. We'll take one last question. We'll do two short questions. Yep. Just shout.
Thank you. Maybe to all the panelists this afternoon, in terms of policy advocacy, and I understand out of the forum, there's always a ministerial education meeting. So what evidence is needed to relook at the current regional education framework and regional education plan? What evidence is required for a policy advocacy at the regional level with the leaders to relook at what are the gaps, what is needed to realign, like and supplement or provide expertise and TA that is needed at the national level, bearing in mind that graduates that come out find it hard to find domestic employment at their own countries, given the size of the population in the country itself and the economy.
Okay.
So in terms of, from a policy lens, what evidence is required for leaders to relook at the framework of Pacific regionalism, the education framework at the regional level, and all those?
Sorry.
Yeah.
We've got a question. We'll take one more.
Yeah, so my question is just about the role of new technologies in reducing these costs of transactions of remittances. In PNG, for example, a lot of my friends, they use the Digicel network to transfer funds from Australia into PNG, and it has the added benefit of going straight to the one-top as opposed to going through a middle manager. There's still costs involved, but surely it's lower than that 19%. So I'm wondering what's the role there and how can you expand it and formalise it a bit more to cut out that middleman?
Okay, very good question. I'm going to ask the final question. I wanted to ask you, Sunil, because you said that there's a lot of unemployment, people can't find jobs, but you're against migration. So I don't think you ever explained why you're against migration. And I also want to ask Professor Jayaraman, you find that remittance causes Dutch disease, so shouldn't you be against migration? Right? Raymond, can we start with you again? That's the on Jonathan's question, and then the question about the regional framework. Perhaps that's one for you, Andrew.
Yeah, maybe I can just answer the regional framework one quickly. The Education Ministers is run by the Forum Secretariat every year. I'm not sure what is the status of the issue, but it doesn't go to leaders in terms of the technical details. The leaders make decisions based on recommendations from the education ministers. And this is discussed at more technical level at the education ministers meeting. In terms of employment, I think there is always a discussion about regional mobility under the Paisa Plus, and that is looking at issues of youth unemployment and also mobilizing resources across countries. And this also goes to probably Sunil's point on migration. But if you look at, for example, Fiji residents from the tourism sector now predominantly work in Cook Islands as another choice. So you go to Cook Islands, any of the hotels, you'll find a lot of Fijians working there. Given just that the pay is almost double the rate that they're getting here in Fiji with other benefits. So I think regionalism has a role to play, and I can remember there was a trade theory, probably Manoj can highlight that. I think it's the Ribisky theorem or something, where the labor moves across and then equalizes the wages.
Yeah.
And basically I think that's what will happen over time, but not immediately, and it requires institutional capacity, also the ownership of the countries to go forward with this. That means countries are willing to open up their borders, which are deficit in workers, and countries which are surplus in labours are able to supply at a constant rate. On the tech and remittances issue, I think Digicel also passes through the commercial banks, and these channels might be closed depending upon how we look at it, because it depends whether the banks looks at this as a risk or not, and whether it's profitable to continue doing this given the risk. All the mobile money that passes through, they have to have a bank account. It cannot pass through just app to app. The only thing can pass through app to app is the virtual currencies such as bitcoins and probably the cryptocurrencies, or the new ones that they're looking at, blockchains. So I'm still, I think I probably can't answer in detail, but it all depends on how the commercial banks in Australia look at it, whether they want to continue with the risk and given the profit.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, Stephen, answering your question, he said, why are you against migration? I'm not against migration at all. But migration is not really helping the Fijian economy the way it is at the moment. We have faced this problem of skills. Today, even when the universities are churning out trained people, graduates, we are not coping, because the nature of jobs that exist does not match with the kind of people we are training in the institution. That's the problem. But also at the country level, and specifically to Fiji, I think we would need the government to be responsive and respond to the situation. The problem is the government really doesn't know. It seems like it doesn't know where the problem is. I would assume if I'm not able to employ people, appropriately qualified people, there should be channels for people in Fiji, industries in Fiji, to get people into the country. That's a difficult task here. I think this is where we need right policies to deal with the situation. So migration is a good thing. It has happened over the world. It is a globalization process. It has provided dividends to developing countries. But specifically for Fiji, which is so small, not smaller than Tuvalu, but given that we have industries, given that some of our industries are sustainable, that we are not able to retain skills. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would also say I'm not against any remittances coming up and raising the real exchange rate. What I'm trying to say is most of the remittances get spent on consumption. There are savings, but savings have to be mobilized, and that is the financial inclusion. And with the cruise ships coming in, and I have seen most of the money spent by the cruise ship passengers, they spend in the neighborhood, unauthorized sometime, I won't say illegal or criminal, they get the money. And if financial inclusion is promoted, most of the money will get into the banks, and banks' operating costs will come down too. And more credit will be available for micro enterprises, where not only women who are now being empowered to take up this, young people can get into some of these operations. And that will add to the domestic output, and domestic output will bring down the domestic price level, which is the one will reduce the real exchange rate for tourism more coming in, and of course niche products can be attractive. Thank you.
Good. All right, well, we are out of time. So thank you very much, everyone, for your excellent questions. Sorry if you didn't get a chance to speak. And thank you most of all to our 4 speakers who gave us a lot of food for thought. So please join me in.